Spotlight, lectures and performances on and around Albany State University.
I'm the moderator for this next session. I'm Professor Leticia Elvira Watson, and my first presenter is Professor Andre Johnson, and he's from our English department. He's going to be presenting When White Patrons Come to Our Homes to Roost, Zora, Neale, Hurston, and Langston Hughes, Mule Bones, and the Trials of Black Images in Hip-Hop. Our professor, Dr. Johnson.
Good morning. Good morning. I want to thank Dr. Mallory and the Gender Studies Committee for this opportunity. Before I begin, I'll pass around some images, and they are images of Lil Wayne and Nicki Minaj. I will give you the context for that. They are double-sided, so please make sure you look at them. Now, this particular talk is coming from a project that I did last year about this time when I was working at Florida A&M University, and there was they have a conference on the Harlem Renaissance every year, and one of my students was very interested in some images, so I had him to collect these images for me, and I had him to do a small write-up, and then I did a larger write-up. So before I really begin this talk, I would like to talk about the duality of this talk. I am pulling or playing with Joan Morgan's title, When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, a hip-hop feminist breaks it down. Now, of course, history tells us that this particular phrase comes actually from Malcolm X. And when Malcolm X was talking about this, he was talking about the death of John F. Kennedy. So when Joan Morgan is making this talk, she's referring to the fact that there's something, there's a call, there's a wake-up call that needs to be made. So I'm playing with both of those in one way or another. I begin this paper with two epigraphs, one from James Baldwin, which is from The Fire Next Time, and one from Jay-Z, A Moment of Clarity, from the Black album, 99 Problems. I keep seeing your face, which is also the face of your father and my brother. Like him, you are tough, dark, vulnerable, moody, with the very tendency to sound truculent, because you want no one to think that you are soft. You may be like your grandfather in this, I don't know, but certainly both you and your father resemble him very much physically. Well, he is dead. He never saw you, and he had a terrible life. He was defeated long before he died because he believed at the bottom of his heart, he really believed that he was what white people said about him. This is not the reason that he became so holy. This is one of the reasons he became so holy. I am sure your father told you something about all of that. Neither you nor your father exhibit the tendency towards holiness. You really are of another era, a part of what happened when the Negro left the land and came to what the late E. Frank LaFazian called the cities of destruction. You can only be destroyed by believing that you really are what the white world calls a nigger. I tell you this because I love you, and please don't you ever forget it. James Baldwin, Fire Next Time. I dumb down on my audience and double my dollars. They criticize me for it, yet they all holler. If skills be sold, truth be told, I'd probably be lyrically Talib Kweli. Truthfully, I want to rhyme like Common, but I did 5 mil, and I ain't rhyming like common sense. Jay-Z, A Moment of Clarity. In 1930, when Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes set out to collaborate on Mule, the two friends wanted to create an earth-shaking comedic play that would separate Negro characters from real-to-life Negro characters. Also, both artists wanted to create a play that was less interested in the sentimentality, protest, and commerciality, and more interested in exposing the cultural potency in rural spaces. Yet the two actually stumbled upon uncharted territory that resulted in the demise of their friendship as they knew it. In this way, we begin to see life being unable to imitate art, or more specifically, we see art being the example for life, particularly by the end of the play. While Jim and Dave in Mule both are able to push Daisy aside and readjust themselves and reposition their friendship and their art, Hughes and Hurston remain two unmovable mountains, unable to find the peaks of their craftsmanship together. Yet it is in their most contentious and conflictual moments that gives us the greatest insight into two of the most alarming and troubled issues of their time and ours: white patronage and commercial appeal. Of course, I do not mean to simply play on the tumultuous and grainy friendship and the breakup of Hurston and Hughes had, nor do I mean to suggest that issues such as cultural authenticity, authorial integrity, patriarchal hegemony, and social stratification are issues that one should slide under the rug as he or she discusses the complexity of Mule. But rather, I want to imply that the current potency and cultural assimilation and commercial enterprise at this particular moment is one such that we must engage the bearings of white patronage and commercial appeal as they have unveiled their roaring heads through both mass media and the current hip-hop empire. In 1947, Zora Neale Hurston writes in What White Publishers Won't Publish, publishing houses and theoretical promoters are in business to make money. They will sponsor anything they believe will sell. They shy away from romantic stories about Negroes and Jews because they feel that they know public indifference to such works unless the story or plays involves racial tension. It can be offered as a study in sociology with romantic side subdued. They know the skepticism in general about the complicated emotion of minorities. The average American just won't conceive it and won't be apt to reject the notion. And publishers and producers take that stand that they are not in the business to educate, but to make money. Sympathetic as they might be, they cannot afford to be crusaders, end quote. Now, if we really want to think about what she said here, it sounds like very much what the young people were articulating earlier, or trying to for sure. And it also sounds like something that is more contemporary than something that was written in 1947. The point of this is to understand that these issues that we're talking about now are continuous issues. They seem to be on a string or a continuum, and that says something about our level of progress or the lack thereof. Although Hurston's insight comes 17 years after Mule is written, we are still able to see the apprehension that pushed her and Hughes to collaborate. Yet we can not allow Hurston's nearly 65-year-old comment to pass off as simply being an issue of the early 1900s. For Hurston and Hughes, the concept and reality of white patronage was more vibrantly present in their lives in the person of Charlotte Osgood Mason. Mason, referred to as often as the godmother by Hurston, had a stable of black writers and artists in her fold. Writers such as Elaine Locke, Aaron Douglas, these are artists too, Claude McKay, along with Hurston and Hughes. To open history of the brazen conflicts and there is an open history of the brazen conflict and heavy-handed influence that Mason was known to exude has often been documented by 1932, Mason's stable is clear of her black stallions. However, Hurston's history and interaction with Mason and other whites leaves her political and artistic agenda marred and dusty, to say the least. Lawrence P. Jackson writes in The Indignant Generation, a narrative of African-American writers and critics, 1934 to 1960. To a degree, Hurston believed that her real battle was outwitting the racially mixed elites of whom she was a part, who she believed had strangled the appearance and undiluted black music, lyric, dance, and folk narrative. She steadily expressed frustration and outrage with the philosophy of Elaine Locke, W.B. Du Bois, the NAACP Secretary Walter White, a well-known danctified trio who seemed to connote physically the ideal of racial caste. And she often railed about these blacks to whites, end quote. While it is Ishmael Reed that gives us Airing the Dirty Laundry in 1995, It is Hurston who dances with the conceptual metaphor as she bobs and weaves away from one influential and acclaimed white to another. Now, when I say that bob and weave there, if there's really any hip hop heads here, it's really a reference to a particular female group that actually says this in some of their lyrics. While many question her motives and her self-serving behavior at times, Hurston holds fast as a cultural anthropologist and is constantly at a tug-of-war with both white and black critics about her naughty craft. Robert Hemingway writes that the Mulebone episode is not so important in itself. Perhaps it provides an intimate glimpse of the kinds of pressures Hurston struggled to control in her life. The tale is worth focusing on because it is true history. Its true history has gone unreported, and also because it illuminates complex tensions in Hurston's life that arose from patronage and personality. The tensions illustrate that Zora Neale Hurston's career would be at times controversial, at times puzzling, and occasionally inconsistent, end quote. As we have all read, Hurston dies without a marker on her grave, and any major rewards of her literary enterprise can be attributed to the state of existence of her role as a struggling artist. Or rather, should we consider that was Hurston unwilling to compromise the bulk of her craft for the greater gain of financial stability? Either way, with Mulebone on the table, Hurston and Hughes provides us with a critical apparatus for one of America's highly scrutinized and commercial industries. Now here I'll talk briefly about the play, and then I'll move kind of to the end, and I'll simply talk about the images, and I'll close it out real quickly. Turning our attention more closely to Act 2 of Mulebone, we see the trial of guitarist Jim Weston come to start. Of course, Jim is supposed to be on trial for hitting his longtime friend and dancing accompanist, Dave Carter, in the head with a mulebone. This attempted assault happens, of course, because both Jim and Dave are battling, quote unquote, for Daisy's attention and affection. As the two exchange words and toast-like utterances, they are both funny and culturally abrasive. The townspeople are present at Joe Clark's store. They egg them on. Yet, once we get to the trial, the townspeople seem to forget this fact. They seem to forget, they simply want to blame, they want to blame Jim for killing Dave or hitting Dave or trying to kill Dave, but they seem to really forget it's them that really encourages him to hit him. And this is very, very important, because often when we talk about some of these issues, in particular with commercial hip hop, we forget the kind of historical background of America. We forget all of these issues and how sometimes we also foster or encourage certain type of tendencies and behavior. It is here that I see fertile ground for a discussion of hip hop and its trials. Like Jim, hip hop has been called into court for knocking its brothers across the head. From old school to new school, from gangster to conscious, from mainstream to underground, from Roxanne Shante versus the real Roxanne, to Boogie Down Productions versus the Juice Crew, from LL versus Kool Moe Dee to Jay-Z versus Nas, and of course, from Biggie to Tupac. As the hip-hop empire continued to grow, the spirit and nature of the battles changed. The change, of course, can be seen in dress attire, gold chains, lyrics, videos, and in capital appeal. More importantly, the change can also be seen in the mass media's and political machines' attempt to villainize rappers as the antithesis to the core of American morals and values. Thus, many rappers' names and faces have been brought up in court cases as well as in public venues of political interest. Trisha Rose, author of the Hip Hop Wars, points out, quote, focusing on hip hop as the cause for violence is just as irresponsible as defining it by pointing to social conditions as the justification for the preparation of gang, gun, and drug slang iconographically and lifestyles. What she's saying here is that if we simply want to blame hip hop rappers for this ideal of violence, then we forget that we live in America, which is the West, where John Wayne was real, where this ideal of attacking Native Americans was real, where 9/11 and this ideal of again going out and villainizing all Muslims and all Arab-like people was real. So she's pointing out that there's a contradiction there. Now, I'll skip a large part here because I do want to hear the others that are presenting. The sum of this kind of argument, this play, really what it shows us two things. It shows us the dynamics that Hurston and Hughes set out to kind of disrupt these stereotypes. Now, their own friendship got in the way. That's the one thing. Within the play, we see that Dave and Jim are two artists who really complement each other, but they allow Daisy to get in their way and they end up breaking up. So now, what am I saying here about hip hop? Well, these images that I passed out to you, they are probably of the two most popular figures that we have during this particular time. Now, the irony here is that Lil Wayne was recently in the media because he got kicked out of an NBA game, and he went then to say all of these expletives about Miami and all these other people. And he said he was a new Tupac because he had been with Chris Bosh's wife. Now, on February the 14th, the other figure that we have here, Nicki Minaj, sends out a picture of herself to her male followers. And there's a connotation there. She's dressed a certain way, and she tells them, this is for you today. So slyly, she's telling them, this is something for you to get off on. Now, these images that we have, if you look at the evolution of Lil Wayne, from this little boy to this strange kind of man, right? And then you look at Nicki Minaj's image from this lovely young lady to one now that is very curvaceous, very bodacious, very implanted, dare I say. So now what am I saying here? These particular images are stereotypes. Is that if you begin to look at Lil Wayne and now you look at 2 Chainz, it's almost looking like Lil Wayne, a 30-year-old man, is trying to be 2 Chainz, a 30-something-year-old man, is trying to emulate these kind of stereotype that Lil Wayne occupies because it's identifiable. And so here, this particular play gives us a moment to look back at the ideal of how, one, when we think back to the Harlem Renaissance, most of the people that actually read the literature were white. Most of the people that came in and listened to the dances and tried to learn the dances and the music were white. Is that now when we think of who really listens to hip hop, it is young white kids from the age of 18 to about 25. It goes further than that, but that's the demographics that's really supporting it and buying the lyrics and listening to the lyrics and buying the CDs. So this says that in order for commercial hip hop to work, it must be like characters, it must be in the embodiment of those stereotypes. Now I'll end this here, this really is trying to prime the conversation that we will have later on with a few scholars about images in hip hop. So I thank you for this particular time, and I hope you understood something that I was saying.
Thank you, Professor Andre Johnson. And now our next presenter is Dr. Melissa Gosdin, Dr. Amber Dean, Dr. Hema Mason, Jasmine McCoon, and Leroy Davis Jr. They're going to be talking about depictions of fatherhood and exploration of non-resident father involvement among African American mothers. Welcome.
I'm actually representing the group. Dr. Mason and Dr. Dean are both here, but this is the research that we have going on right now in behavioral sciences, and I just want to explain a little bit about it. And it's ongoing research, so the results that I'm presenting today are preliminary, but it'll give you an idea of what we're doing. Basically, we're looking at depictions of fatherhood among African American mothers who have non-resident or who have children with non-resident fathers. We're wanting to get an idea about their mental health status, their physical health status, and how they perceive the parenting and fatherhood role. Okay. Brief overview, we're just looking at how, like I said, African American or single African American mothers conceptualize fatherhood and how those perceptions impact their physical and mental health, or if they do. We know that depression is a very common mental illness among a lot of women, or it's more commonly found in women for various reasons. A lot of it has to do with our socialization and the fact that women are more likely to seek treatment for depression and mental health. But we know that, things like postpartum depression, anxiety, depression, are something important and something that we need to look at. We also know that there's very little research conducted among African American mothers and how their perceptions of fatherhood actually impact their mental and physical health. Okay. A brief overview of our methodology. This is a qualitative research study, meaning that we're looking at in-depth information, not just numbers. So what we did is, as a group, we've conducted 4 focus groups. The end goal is to do 10 focus groups, so we're still actively recruiting for that. We are interviewing women on campus, single African American mothers who have children with non-resident fathers. The focus groups are being conducted on campus. We are looking at, or we're actually interviewing them to get at their perceptions, like we said, of fatherhood, of motherhood, what stresses them out on a daily basis, how they perceive their mental and physical health, etc. Okay. Data is currently being analyzed. We are audio recording all of the focus groups. And upon recording the focus groups, we're transcribing them verbatim, or our student research team is transcribing them verbatim, which is a very time-consuming process. But once all of the focus groups are transcribed, we're actually going through line by line and analyzing, looking for common themes. The whole idea is to build theory based on the data that we are finding. And then once we have common themes identified, we will present a theoretical framework that explains this co-parenting relationship and the mental and physical health needs of African American mothers who have children with non-resident fathers. Okay, some of our findings thus far. We have found that a lot of the mothers that we have talked to show that their fathers are their role models. So they use their own fathers as a standard for how they believe that the father of their children should act and behave. For the most part, their fathers set the bar pretty high. Therefore, it left some room for feeling like the fathers are letting them down and their children down. Expectation of support. They have a lot of expectations that are placed upon the fathers of their children. They expect the father to be there, to be mature, to have grown up. They feel like because they have had to grow up quicker than maybe they would have otherwise, they feel like the fathers also need to grow up. And when that doesn't happen, they do have a little bit of resentment or frustration, I should say, with the fathers. They've also viewed lack of involvement on the father's part as selfishness. In other words, they feel like they could grow up if they really wanted to, and because they're not choosing to grow up like they should, that they are picking their lifestyle and their needs over that of their children. Okay. We're also finding that depression is a proxy. In other words, the mothers so far haven't necessarily been depressed, although they do express, feelings of anxiety and sadness from time to time. However, they feel more depressed for their children, who in their eyes feel like they're growing up without a father figure or without a good father. So they're actually displaying depression and depressive symptoms on behalf of their children. There's also a disconnection between the expectations of fathers and the acceptance of non-involvement. All of these pregnancies, for the most part, maybe with the exception of 1 or 2, were unplanned. And with that said, they're making decisions as they go along. And therefore, the expectations of the father upon finding out that they're pregnant, they pretty much said that the expectations were low. They didn't necessarily expect the fathers to be around or to participate much in their lives. But even after expressing that expectation, they were clearly upset when, as time went on, that they found out that the fathers still haven't stepped up to the plate, so to speak. So there's a discrepancy between the expectations and the reality of what's going on as far as the involvement or level of involvement. We also know that the lack of social support, especially on campus. I'm standing in the way. A lot of these mothers express the need to be able to debrief, to be able to discuss with other mothers in their same situation, especially on a college campus where they're experiencing role strain and role conflict. As a student, they have a lot going on, and then their multiple roles are colliding. They need people to talk to, and they feel like, especially even here at ASU, their needs aren't being met. So that could be, another area that we look into as far as developing programs for single mothers and single fathers. They've also expressed divine intervention as far as the timing of their pregnancy, what this means as far as like giving or providing meaning and purpose to their lives. They feel like because God did provide them with the child, that, they have to take that as a sign that they have to grow up and mature. They're directed. They want to go on with their lives and to have a better life for their children. They also believe that, God will provide, and that to a large extent has given them resiliency or helped to buffer these negative depressive feelings that sometimes mothers can face when raising children alone. Okay. Also, we found so far that motherhood provides a healthy an incentive for healthy behaviors, not just emotionally maturity. Like they all express that they want to grow up and they want to be mature and they feel like they're on the right path. But also as far as physical health goes, regular exercise, eating healthy. They felt like they owed it not to just themselves, but also to their children. Most of the mothers that we talked to experience fatigue. And, that's due to role strain, role conflict. They have a lot going on. They feel tired, but they also exhibited cognitive dissonance, what we would say in social psychology. Basically, when someone holds two different attitudes, oftentimes you feel the pressure to change your behavior so that your behavior matches your attitude. And we found that the mothers are exhibiting this in the sense that they feel guilty because they believe that to be a good parent, that means being attentive and being active in your child's life, but they're tired. That's the reality of it. So you feel guilty when you feel like you're not living up to being the mother that you should be by societal standards. So we definitely found that in pretty much all of the participants. We also found a couple of unexpected findings. The relationships reported between the mothers and the fathers, their babies, were very volatile, meaning that they were often described as intense, described as an emotional roller coaster. Maybe one day or 1 week or 1 month or maybe even a year, they were in a good spot and they were able to co-parent, and then something happened. Maybe the father, picked up a girlfriend, or the mother started dating someone, and they weren't able to get along, and they saw how that impacted their child. We also saw that violence is very normative in some of these relationships. Many of the mothers reported having actual physical altercations with their baby's fathers, which we were surprised by that. Not necessarily, we knew that there would probably be some emotional abuse or emotional altercations that brought out emotionality, but not necessarily the physical violence that we were finding. We also found, like I said earlier, resiliency. These mothers are very strong, resilient. They owed that to God, to their belief in God, to their parents. Their families were very strong social support systems. We also found that going back to violence, I'm sorry, I skipped around, that violence actually decreases with age. So we did find some discrepancies between the younger mothers and the older mothers. Now, we haven't had a whole lot of older mothers, but the few that we've had, because we're recruiting from students, faculty, and staff, we found out that the older mothers seem to be less likely to engage in physical altercations with their fathers, with the father's children. Okay, future studies. This is how I will conclude today. We definitely believe, based on what we've found so far, that non-resident African American fathers and their perceptions need to be explored. Their perceptions of motherhood, what do they expect from the mothers of their children? And how does that impact their expectations or their perceptions of fatherhood? We also know that we need to explore barriers to parenting. What prevents African American fathers from being able to parent the way that a lot of these mothers expressed was needed in order for their child to be emotionally and developmentally mature and sound. So that was basically our findings so far. This is the flyer that we use for recruitment. One of our student researchers did this, Roy Davis. But yeah, that's basically our study thus far. Thank you.
Dr. Amber Dean and Brianna Pearson, is she here? The impact of media on African American women's attitude towards appearance and body image. Right, Dr. Amber Dean.
Good morning. So we've talked a lot this morning about the media, and I don't want to vilify the media, but I do think that we need to be critical of the media. On average, 18 to 24-year-olds spend about 11 and a half hours engaged in media a day. So given that high number, we do need to be critical of the images that are out there. The purpose of my study is to give you a little bit of background. I did this study with a student last semester as a project for the undergraduate research symposium, so this is kind of building off of that initial study. The purpose of our study is to understand how socio-cultural attitudes shape media images of African American women, to understand how the absence or the narrow portrayal of African American women in media impacts African American women, and to examine socio-cultural attitudes towards appearance among African American female college students. Now, Field did a study that found that pre-adolescent and adolescent girls who were frequent readers of fashion magazines were more likely to report wanting to lose weight and dieting based on magazine articles and images. So it's important that we understand that there may be differences in the processes through which television and magazines respectively shape body dissatisfaction. The available evidence suggests that the engagement with mass media is at the very least a risk factor for negative body image. So I really wanted to understand how this is operating for African American women, how this is operating for young African college-aged women. And so to do this, we engaged in this study. So women in the media, images in magazines and on television are altered, but we typically don't see them through altered lenses. We see them as authentic, we see them as real. They typically reflect standard beauty ideals, very white women, very thin women, women with long hair, blonde, blue-eyed women. All women are held to these beauty standards. However, images of African American women are largely absent or are represented in very stereotypical ways. Now, when we've looked at this empirically, we have found that African American women are typically less vulnerable to thin ideal media. African American women are less likely to report body image dissatisfaction, and ethnic identity typically serves as a buffer against negative messages transmitted via the dominant culture through media. However, we are seeing increases in the number of women of color with eating disorders. We're seeing increases in the number of women of color getting cosmetic surgery. Now, research on this is fairly new, so we don't know, is this a function of race? Is this a function of class? So further studies will indicate whether or not that's true. Historically, again, the images of African American women, black women, have been very narrow or very stereotypical. African American women have been portrayed as mammy or mammy-like, very desexualized, very exaggerated features. African American women have been presented as strong, tough, or sturdy. Again, very desexualized. However, there's a paradox that exists with these images. Women and it's kind of the public-private debate that goes on. In public, women, African American women, are very submissive, if we're talking about media images, very submissive. However, in their homes, they're seen as the matriarch. So again, that strong, sturdy exterior. Now, contemporary images of black women, again, very hypersexualized. There are few representations of African American women in the media, and when they are included, they are very hypersexualized. This picture of Rihanna, very sexualized, very objectified. She's seen as pieces of her body. Her body is a billboard. Like we talked about this morning, African American women as angry or aggressive. And inauthentic. The Real Housewives kind of got beat up on this morning. But contemporary images of African American women are seen as inauthentic, and they do not reflect the everyday lived experiences of most women of color. So I wanted to look at this empirically, and to do that, I use the socio-cultural attitudes towards appearance scale. We surveyed 163 African American women attending a small HBCU in the South. We used purposive sampling techniques and included a demographic questionnaire. Within this scale, there are 3 subscales. One looks at how women internalize messages disseminated via the media. Another one looks at how women internalize messages about female athletes in the media. And finally, the other scale is, do women feel pressure to adhere, to change the way their body looks, to change their appearance based on media images? Now, the findings were quite interesting. The sample was incredibly homogeneous. 90% identified as single, straight, and Christian. Therefore, the results were very skewed, for lack of a better word. 93% of the sample scored low to medium on the range for the overall scale, meaning that media does not negatively influence African American women, the women included in this study. Findings further suggest that there is a weak but positive correlation between the pressure subscale. Do women feel pressure to maintain these media ideals that are presented through television magazines? Findings suggest that the women included in this study look to media as a source of what is attractive and feel pressure to change their appearance. Overall findings, results of this study indicate that women on this particular campus are not negatively impacted by media. After I completed the survey, I did some informal interviews because I was kind of somewhat surprised by the findings. And I did find that women look to media for fashion and style. And women on this campus look to media for the latest hairstyles. But they're not looking to the media for body image. They're not making sure that they're keeping up with what's out there in the media. So phase 2, based on the somewhat surprising findings, I'm going to add to the instrument. What was lacking in the original instrument, I didn't capture what are African American women at this institution, what are they watching? What's going on? What are they seeing? I think that might have an impact on the findings of this study. I'm also going to increase the sample size and expand the age categories. I primarily looked at women ages 18 to 24. I think older women may have a different view. I think even maybe younger, of course, I'm going to keep it at 18, but I think younger women might have a different perspective on this. And I want to include ethnic identity. Ethnic identity has been identified as a buffer against negative body dissatisfaction, and I want to see how that's operating here on campus. I wanted to leave on a couple of positive notes, some positive images of black women in popular media. Our First Lady, Michelle Obama, Gabby Douglas, the young gymnast, and Kavashane Wallace. So again, this study is ongoing. Findings are preliminary. That's all I got.
Well, this is the end of our session, and I believe, Dr. Mellor, we're going into lunch right now.